Edward Cullen was a monster who believed he didn't deserve to be loved. And yet his story begins in a hospital bed, burning with fever, dying. It ends with him holding a child he never thought he could have, by the side of the woman who changed everything. So how did a dying boy from 1901 Chicago become an immortal mind reader, fall in love with a human, and defy everything he believed about his own damned soul? This is the story of Edward Cullen, how he was made, how he fell, and how he became someone who could finally accept love. Edward Anthony Mason Jr. was born in Chicago, Illinois, in 1901. He was raised in a world of cobblestone streets, war horses, and social rules more rigid than steel. His father, a well-known lawyer, was strict and proper, and his mother Elizabeth was the heart of their small family, kind, strong, and deeply devoted to her son. But Edward's life, like the lives of so many in 1918, was upended by a tragedy that swept across the globe, the Spanish influenza. By the time Edward was 17, he lay in a hospital bed surrounded by the scent of death. His mother was already gone. He was next. Therefore, when Dr. Carlisle Cullen walked into that hospital and saw the boy's barely beating heart, something inside him broke. Because Carlisle had spent centuries trying not to interfere in human fate, but this time, he couldn't walk away. He turned Edward into a vampire. Becoming a vampire wasn't the salvation Edward imagined. It was, to him, a curse. He woke with heightened senses, impossible strength, and a mind that could suddenly hear the thoughts of everyone around him, and it was overwhelming. Voices without silence, needs without morality. Edward, who once dreamed of becoming a soldier, now believed himself damned. But then, Carlisle, his creator, his father in all ways that mattered, offered him something rare, a moral compass, a family, a way to live among humans without feeding on them. Still, Edward struggled. He wanted to believe Carlisle, but the hunger, the thoughts, the war inside his own mind, it was too much. Therefore, Edward left. For nearly a decade, he roamed alone. At first, he justified his thirst by only feeding on murderers, those whose minds revealed their guilt. He believed himself a righteous predator. But then, the weight of what he was doing, of the blood, of the death, it caught up to him. He returned to Carlisle and to a path of restraint. Decades passed. The Cullen family grew. Rosalie, Emmett, Alice, Jasper, each came with their own stories, their own pains, and Edward, still young by vampire standards, stood among them as the haunted, brooding observer. He was close to Alice, whose visions gave him clarity. He was kind to Esme, who treated him like the son she never had. But he kept to himself, because Edward didn't believe love was possible for someone like him. He had seen inside too many human minds. He knew what he was capable of, and the idea of connecting with someone in that way, with desire, with vulnerability, with trust, felt like another life. A life he could never have, until Bella Swan walked into Forks High School. She smelled like sunlight. That was the first thing. Edward had never experienced bloodlust like the kind Bella awakened in him. It wasn't just her scent, it was her silence. He couldn't hear her thoughts. For someone who lived bombarded by the internal monologues of everyone around him, Bella was a void, a mystery. And Edward, the mind reader, was drawn to that silence like a drowning man to air. Therefore, he fought it. He ran. He tried to transfer out of school. But then, she looked at him, and something cracked. The more he watched Bella, the more he learned what she was. Clumsy, kind, fiercely loyal, and maddeningly fearless. And she saw him. Not the monster, not the vampire. Him. Edward didn't fall in love. He crashed. But loving a human came with a price. He knew what he was risking: her life, her soul, his family's safety. Therefore he tried to distance himself. He warned her away. He vanished into the forest. But then, when she was almost killed, and he saved her, there was no going back. They were connected now. Completely. And Edward became her shadow and her protector. He watched her sleep. He memorized her voice. He introduced her to his family, despite their fears. But still, he feared himself most of all, because he could never stop wanting her blood. And he believed he would be the thing that destroyed her. Then came James, a sadistic tracker who hunted Bella for sport. And for the first time, Edward's worst fear came true. His world had endangered the girl he loved. Therefore, he had to fight. He had to kill. He had to suck the venom from Bella's wrist without killing her. And he did. But the trauma left scars, not just on Bella's skin, but on Edward's heart. So when he left her in New Moon, it wasn't because he stopped loving her. It was because he loved her too much to keep risking her life. But then, Bella jumped off a cliff. He thought she was dead, and Edward, the immortal, decided he couldn't live another moment in a world where Bella didn't exist. He went to the Volturi, the vampire royalty, to beg for death. He was ready to die, thinking he had failed to protect the only thing that ever made him feel alive. But Bella came. She stopped him. She saved him. And from that moment on, he knew. They were bound, not just by love, but by survival. They married. He turned her. They had a daughter, Renesmee, the impossible child born of vampire and human. Edward became something he never imagined. A father, a husband, a man who had once called himself a monster, now protecting life instead of stealing it. But then came another threat, the Volturi again, this time convinced Renesmee was a threat to their secrecy. So Edward gathered allies. He stood beside those he once distrusted. He risked everything. And when the storm passed, he had something he never believed he deserved. Peace. Edward Cullen is not the hero of every story. He is not the strongest, not the kindest, not even the most powerful, but he is perhaps the most human. Because Edward was never just a vampire. He was a boy who lost his mother, a son who found a father, a mind reader who longed for silence, a killer who chose mercy, a man who believed he was broken until someone showed him he wasn't. So if you ask what Edward Cullen really is, the answer isn't monster. It's hope. And maybe that's what makes him unforgettable. Would you have forgiven yourself if you were him? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more lore from Twilight and beyond.